Look at, I still get super nervous presenting at BriForum because the speakers of this event are just amazing. I mean, like, I love the fact that, I mean, I feel like everyone in the, who, blogs and out there, and it's really top notch. So, but I feel like for me to be at an event like this.
Oh, this is, yeah, the speakers, yeah, I'm overwhelmed every time I see the speakers here, but the attendees know so much too. It blows my mind. I always get nervous that somebody's just gonna belt out, "You're so fucking wrong," and then tell me all about, give the session for me instead. Just to, like, come up and take my clicker and say, "Here you go." So now this is why we've actually never given a presentation before together at BriForum, and so we figured this is how we would shoulder that load.
Yeah.
We can handle the nerves together.
And so, in this session, we're calling it Brian and Gabe's 5 by 15, where we're going to try to present 5 different topics and spend about 15 minutes per topic. And that partially became because we had this idea to present together. And then, of course, the next question is, well, what will we present? And we had a whole bunch of different ideas about like what's important to Gabe versus what's important to me. These are different things. We couldn't sort of agree on a topic, and there's a lot of stuff we wanted to say. So we figure, well, we'll have sort of 5 mini sessions that are about 15 minutes each.
Occasionally we disagree on things.
Yeah,
so.
In case you haven't noticed. But I guess to introduce, hi, I'm Brian.
That one. And I'm Gabe, and there's Jack even.
This one you have to point out. That one is that guy. That guy is that guy.
So how long ago do you think that was? When was it?
This is 1999.
Okay.
This is Gabe and I were living together in an apartment.
Beer.
Clearly, yeah. I think I'm 20, Gabe's 19, and Jack is about 15 or 14.
And notice his hand down here?
Yeah, because I've got a beer in my hand, Gabe's got a beer, and Jack, where's his hand? But Jack and Gabe and I, the 3 bloggers on BrianMadden.com, have been working together for a long time. Gabe and I have been working together since 1998 as colleagues, working for a consultancy company and working for VAR and doing Citrix implementations and that kind of thing. And Jack joined us in 2004, I think. Is that 2005?
2000. Yeah, it was a summer break, right? He was our intern, basically just doing all of our bitch work.
And then he went to grad school and got a music degree. He graduated from so he got his master's degree in music, and of course needed a job, so he came back to work with us. And that's how Jack, Jack is doing most of the enterprise mobility stuff, because that was kind of brand new. And even Gabe and I, even though sort of relatively young still in the grand scheme of the world, we have been in IT since, working together since 98. We started working in IT in 96, each of us. And
we both started doing lifecycle services, PC repair, that sort of a thing. And then we were set up on a play date, basically, by a sales rep who knew Brian from some accounts and knew me from some other accounts. And the very first day that I got promoted to working on servers, I met Brian, and he said, "I'm going out to this hospital. We're going to do this proof of concept for a thing called Citrix." And I believe it was Metaframe 1.0. And so the day I met you was the first pilot you'd ever done for Citrix, Metaframe. And that was also my first pilot. And then this happened.
Yeah. But it was great for when Jack joined us again 2 years ago. All this mobility stuff was kind of happening, and iPads, and even Gabe and I have been in IT long enough to say, iPads at work? Hey, Jack, new guy. Yeah. This is your area now. And it's kind of nice, because even though Jack has only been studying this space for 2 years, everything he's doing around enterprise mobility, he didn't have a lot of catching up to do, because really no one 2 years ago, it was brand new to everyone, so that's why he's
been
able
at it
to.
As long as everybody else.
Yeah, yeah. So anyway, so the 5 topics we want to talk about today, they sort of relate to each other a little bit, but it's just we have some sort of thoughts on this kind of stuff, and we feel we want to kind of get your thoughts also on these various topics. So in the next 71 minutes,
let's do it.
Let's hit it. So the first topic we want to look at is the future of Windows apps, and I gave a presentation here at BriForum maybe last year or 2 years ago, talking about the future of Windows apps and what it means and all that sort of thing. And remember, I don't know if you saw the keynote yesterday. The keynote video I posted to the homepage of BrianMadden.com, and it was only about 20 minutes, sort of overall update. So if you missed the keynote yesterday, check out that video online. It's like 20 minutes kind of state of the industry. But remember, one of the things I mentioned yesterday, and I had mentioned before, was first of all, when we talk about the future of Windows apps, I showed this slide. Like in the future, like there will always be Windows apps. Especially, I should say, traditional Windows desktop applications. So these are the Win32 apps that we've been supporting forever. I mean, even if, imagine some crazy future world where everything is like touch, I don't even know, and iPads and web, cloud, whatever, that's all fine, but in the enterprise world, we will always have Windows apps that we have to support, because some of these apps, the guy who wrote them is dead, and it's still the business runs on it, and it's this weird Ole embedded script robo file that just
look
happens.
at all the 16-bit apps that we still have to deal with today.
Yeah, and like there's some mainframes in the world
20
today,
years
you know,
old.
so
Yeah.
So Windows apps are not going away. So when we say the future of Windows apps, we're talking about the future of Windows desktop applications that we're supporting today. We believe, even though the numbers of those applications might get fewer and fewer, because maybe in 5 years all versions of Office are cloud-based and it's HTML5, I don't know, whatever. But there will always be those weirdo Windows apps we're supporting forever. So that's what we're talking about for this. Also, that future world, remember I used this slide yesterday, which I believe if you want to summarize our industry and our jobs in one slide, it's this. And that is that, so I'm talking about traditional Windows applications will be part of our apps. We have all these different app platforms, new Windows Touch apps, and Android and iOS and HTML5 and all that kind of stuff. All the users down here have all different devices, this keyboards, no keyboards, touch.
Did you speak to what these were yesterday?
Not yesterday, no.
I hear you speak a lot, so sometimes I tune you out. But I mean, all these different application layers are the things that we have to deal with today as well, or all these aspects of applications, and how we deliver them. Because the challenge is that each one of these has a different hardware, different UI, different app integration features, and so our challenge is trying to deploy all these different applications for all these platforms to these devices, and this is why we have so many arrows.
Yeah, because all this middle area is all these things we want to move to doing as a service. Like VMware has Horizon, Citrix has Cloud Gateway, Symantec is doing stuff here, Dell has stuff, CA, or there's all these security identities, authentication, data as a service. That's all that sort of crap in the middle that ideally connects all of our applications together and connects all of our devices together. And all these white arrows is the stuff that we are trying to figure out now, I guess. So the point is that, like, I feel like this is the future of sort of enterprise end user computing. And in some form of this, we're going to evolve to in the next few years. But again, what Gabe and I are talking about right now is the future of traditional Windows applications. So in this whole world of this future, how do these old school Windows apps fit into that world? And so I guess we just sort of created a few points, which, sorry for words on the screen, but
This is the only time I think we dump words onto the screen.
So there's a few knowns about this. Like traditional Windows applications, they will always require Windows. So
we can't segment out all the different aspects of Windows and deploy them separately because they won't run on the other platforms. So that and what that means is that we always have to package our applications with a full instance of Windows to deliver them. It's like terminal services publishing an application. Behind the scenes is a full Windows desktop. We're just hiding that because we still have to deliver that application with Windows. We just hide that aspect of it.
I was talking to a guy yesterday who's doing like application delivery for a bunch of students, like several 100,000 students, and he was saying that they're using app streaming the students have Windows laptops and they can stream the application down. It's great because they don't have the overhead of VDI and everything. But he said more and more of our users now are using Macs, and we don't want to go to VDI because we have 300,000 students, and that's just an insane environment. So what can I do to get these Windows apps to run on the Mac? And the only answer to that is, man, you're talking about a VM. And it may be, what's nice is if you're packaging that VM just to run an application, maybe I don't need the whole secondary desktop with start menu and all that kind of stuff. Maybe I can just sort of hide all that. But bottom line is if you run a Windows app to run somewhere, there has to be a copy of Windows somewhere.
Yeah, unless you can Wine it or something
And we
like
looked
that.
at Wine, and that's a separate...
Has anybody ever used Wine in production?
Do you know Wine? It's W-I-N-E, and it stands for Wine is not an emulator. And basically, it's a Windows API level translation that they wrote for Linux. So it sort of intercepts the Windows API calls and then translates them to Linux API calls, and it makes your applications run. Now the problem is there's several versions behind Windows, and there's still a long list of all the APIs that they haven't figured out how to implement yet. So Wine today, for example, can do Office 2010, is the latest version of Office that it can support. And it emulates all the API calls up to Windows XP, SP3, or something like that.
Yeah, it emulates a lot of them. I mean, so the applications themselves don't tend to work 100%. And that's why, I mean, nobody raised their hand when I asked if anybody.
Now, maybe in the future there's an opportunity for Wine, because if you believe, going back to that previous slide, that maybe at some point the whole industry moves away from traditional Windows desktop applications, then it's almost like in 10 years from now, the Windows desktop applications we have to support are 10 years old, and maybe Wine of the year 2023 actually does support that.
And if they get off their high horse and start emulating instead of
oh yeah, because they said they're not an emulator.
Their own SDKs, yeah.
Yeah, question.
Yeah, Microsoft offer Medley for Windows 7 to run an XP VM and do all hiding and suggesting.
Yeah, so in the comment about, and I'm going to repeat the comment for the video, Microsoft offers MedV, for example, to have Windows XP VM behind the scenes of Windows 7. That's all completely hidden. Perfect example. So there are ways that we can run Windows without majorly impacting the user, but Windows is going to have to run there somewhere. And if you're running Windows, you're dealing with Windows licenses and registries and DLLs and all of that kind of stuff.
Did you have something to add to that? It looked like you were going to keep talking.
Yeah, so the question is offering something like MedV to other platforms. I mean, certainly there's a VMware player, there's Fusion and stuff, so we can make a Windows VM that obviously runs on any platform. And what I have, I'm going kind of out of order here. Do you know Nlight and vLight? Have you heard of these things? So basically what these are sort of free community tools where if you just take a regular Windows VM, like install Windows XP into a VM and just do next, how big is the VMDK file going to be? Like 2 gigs or something like that? Well, you can go through the installation routine and uncheck all those extra options. Like if you're building a Windows VM just to deliver one business application, you don't need Paint and all that sort of thing. The people that make Nlight, and Nlight is for XP and vLight is for Vista, the people that make this, they basically make a GUI, and you check boxes on all the stuff you don't need. Because you can pull out all these extra fonts, you can pull out drivers for stuff you don't need, you can pull out like control panel plugins, you can pull out DLLs, you can pull out the 16-bit subsystem, and they just go through and delete all the registry keys and files that you don't need inside that image. And you can actually get a full bootable Windows XP image down to 150, 200 megabytes.
Now for Windows 7 though, we found, I don't know if vLight works for Windows 7, but there is no specific Windows 7 version.
Yeah, there's people that say they got vLight working, but it's iffy.
Windows 7 though, the next install for Windows 7, 6.8 gigabytes.
Of disk space.
Yeah.
And that's not saying you need that much to run. That's not counting swap files and stuff. That's how big your VMDK is. That's how much is installed onto the C drive when you install Windows 7. But so the point is, even if Nlight and vLight are not the way to do it, conceptually, if I just need to provide a Windows runtime to my environment, I can get on board with the idea that I can cut a lot of crap out of there, and it's just a sort of a portable runtime that I can then put in a hypervisor to run on whichever platform I happen to have. I should say, by the way, to go back a little bit, these traditional Windows applications we have, if I'm delivering them from the data center, then that's going to be VDI or terminal server. We'll cover that in a minute. When I'm talking about wrapping these Windows apps in some kind of Windows VM, so this is for non-data center based applications. This is for the apps that I want to run on my laptop or whatever. Bless you.
And it's not wrapping in the sense that they're talking about next door with app wrapping for mobile devices and stuff. We're just talking about deploying monolithic Windows instances.
But what's kind of interesting though is where this becomes fascinating, because Gabe and I were talking last night, and he's like, but the thing is, I mentioned there's a thing called Box, B-O-C-H-S. Ever heard of this? It's for jailbroken iOS devices, and it's a Windows VM. And so you can run Windows VM on a jailbroken iOS device, but it's not the best performance. But what's nice is if you're only looking at...
It's a 2 on a scale of 1 to 20.
But think about this. If we're only talking about doing this for our traditional Windows desktop applications, thinking that at some point maybe all new applications are cloud, web, Windows Store, there's something new, right? This is only for old-time applications. Well, our old-time application requirements, that's almost like a point-in-time snapshots. Like if I have if I've got some GIS application from 1998, that application was written when the fastest computers were 300 megahertz and 64 megs of RAM. And so, but Moore's law is going faster and faster and faster with all of these devices and everything we have. So we may get to the point where I can take now a 10-year-old Windows application, wrap it in something like Windows XP, and on an iPhone 11 in the year 2020 or whatever, maybe that's got enough power. Now, this doesn't fix how do you use Windows app on the iPhone and touching.
Yeah,
that's a
if
whole
you did
different.
that, you have all the same problems you would otherwise have. So that's not to say that the desktop or laptop form factor is going away. That's just an example of, look, we should be able to in the future use boxed up Windows in any situation.
So I kind of see that. So the future again. So we're not talking about data center apps, but I can see the sort of bottom line with this is I could see a future where the old school Windows desktops apps we have, instead of delivering like a thin app package that's an exe, we're delivering like a full VM that has a bare minimal Windows runtime. At this point, it can be locked down because the user isn't seeing the Windows desktop. I don't care about personalization and all that sort of stuff. And I'm sort of, instead of delivering my Windows app as a thin app exe, I'm delivering my Windows app as a 400 meg VMDK that I can boot on any device, maybe potentially in the future on Androids and iPhones and everything.
Microsoft gave us ThinPC, which sounds like a really good idea. It takes that 6.8 gig Windows 7 image and takes it down to 2.5 gig, something like that. The problem is you can't actually run anything on it. You're not allowed to.
Legally,
so you can run Internet Explorer and remote desktop connection. That's all. So even though you can install these other things, you're not allowed to. But it is a good start, so you could do it a little bit now if you wanted to.
So this is one of the things I want to work on. Like I've got a long list of fun projects, but I'd love to look into vLite more and look at that on Windows 7 and see if we can start to build some scripts just as a thought experiment to see what can happen and how small we can make it. By the way, maybe we don't even need Windows 7. Like we can vLite, we can nLite Windows XP, because these are old Windows desktop applications that may run on Windows XP.
The problem is we still have to manage Windows, though, at that point. So if we do it with Windows XP, we've got a really short time frame where we can reliably deploy that safely,
but I don't know
securely.
I don't know if that matters, though, because we're not
if we can
seeing
isolate
Windows. Because if this is, and we can isolate it since we're running as a VM.
But we're still deploying it, and it's still running. So if you're deploying Windows XP and it's internet connected after April 8th next year, that's a pretty big.
Although it is running in a VM, so maybe our VM frame has like proxy and firewall and all that sort of thing.
Wow, we're making up a lot of technology.
Question, comment, yeah.
Isn't a big part of this Microsoft is going to have to change dynamically its licensing?
It's a big part that Microsoft will have to change dynamically, dramatically their licensing. I would say yes. This is where
I saw Gabe's post about is RT the ideal thin client device, and it was a really positive post, and then someone put up, no, actually you can't do that.
Right, because
and that was the end of that.
So in order to use an RT device as a thin client, you still have to have a desktop with SA running on your desk. So it's not that the RT device comes with the connection license.
Yeah.
Only, you also have to be running a Windows device. So there's still another Windows device to manage and purchase in order to do it. So yeah, that's a Microsoft licensing belly.
Whenever we find these unique use cases, we end up, Microsoft don't allow that.
Yeah, but Microsoft don't allow it, but if you have SA, that's the thing, because for all these traditional Windows applications, they will require Windows, which means we have to be properly licensed with Microsoft, which means we're probably going to be paying for SA forever. And if we don't like it, we should get a time machine and not let them be a monopoly in 1995. But because that happened, and because we have these traditional, so maybe that's more impetus for, okay, go ahead and just rewrite your application to not be a Windows app, and then we can stop using SA.
And there are situations where we just blatantly flaunt Microsoft licensing requirements. Office, technically, to this day, you are required to buy a license of Office for every single device that accesses Office. Who here buys a license of Office for every single device, as opposed to just buying a copy for every single user?
And we're not talking about the home use rights. We mean like even in the company. And a lot of companies say don't even know that.
And this is a situation where it passes your straight face test. You can look at Microsoft and say, I believe I've bought the appropriate amount of licenses, despite the fact that this EULA says otherwise.
And so you bring that,
but
you
everybody
bring your Microsoft Surface companion device into the office and access into your company, and then access Microsoft Office on your VDI, and you're supposed to have a second Microsoft Office license for that.
And one for your computer at home,
so
and one for your
SA
iPad,
covers
and
your
for
Windows
your
licenses, but yeah, you access Office on VDI from your phone, That's a separate office license. How many of you are doing that today?
Right.
Yeah, oops.
So they can't sue us all, right? And so that's the thing. So if we all do it.
SA for Office, aren't you? There is a way of doing it if you have SA for Office, and then you can.
Yeah, and
yeah.
365, and yeah.
Yeah, you then have to read by Office if you want to do
Yeah.
In the U.S., the only people that raise their hands when we ask that question are people that work for the government, which I assume they pay $3 per license or something anyway. So they all raise their hands, but typically.
So that's that topic. So there's this idea of Windows distributed on devices, Windows apps. We might be able to wrap them in some way, and that's interesting to us. That's on devices. So the other one, how about Windows in the data center? And so this, when you're talking about Windows in the data center, is terminal server kind of versus VDI. And I don't know if any of you happened to be at BriForum 2007, which was in Chicago. I gave a session which I co-presented with Benny Trich. And we played characters. This is in those days of the Microsoft advertisements, like I'm a PC, I'm a Mac. So in this one, in 2007, it was TS versus VDI, and Benny was TS, with his three-piece suit, and I played the VDI character. And so we gave that session to people.
Do you have bleached tips?
I don't know if my hair was bleached in that time, but the net of that presentation, the 2007 worldview, was VDI is just too risky and complex, and terminal server is the way to go when it's terminal server versus VDI. Then in 2009, so 2 years later, I gave that session again at VMworld, and the results in 2009 actually had kind of changed, where VDI was too expensive. So we had sort of worked out some of the more, the risk and complex stuff, but VDI, the cost model just didn't line up. And so we still felt like terminal server won in 2009 because VDI was just so expensive. Now, 2011, so another 2 years later, by the way, in 2009, I said I'm never doing this presentation again. 2011, I did this presentation at VMworld, and I think I gave it at BriForum here also, TS versus VDI again. And because more had changed. And now we got into that whole we like VDI for persistence. So if you have desktops in the data center and you want them to be persistent, go VDI for that. But if you're using shared desktops, just use terminal server instead of the cloning and all that for VDI, because that's there. So that's 2011. So now I guess continue with that trend.
Now we've got it, instead of a full session, now it's down to a 15-minute segment of a session.
Though I could do a full session on this.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But it's crazy because, again, that was 2011. And as you saw in the keynote yesterday, our view has evolved again from that. And so so we would kind of talk through, in the past 2 years, what's changed in our worldview about TS versus VDI. And to be very clear here again, both of these cases, in the old days, we had desktops on the desk. Then we had the idea of moving the desktop into the data center. And of course, users just deal with that. So the point today, though, is we're not saying TS versus VDI versus local. This is not keyboards versus iPads. This is for your traditional Windows applications in the data center. Do we think about that for TS, or do we think about that for VDI? And as you can imagine, I wrote an article a little while ago. This is back in 2010. The inverse bell curve of terminal server. This stuff is going to be huge again. What I mean is I felt that terminal server's best days were ahead of it, and this inverse bell curve is like this. So terminal server back in the day was kind of down here, and at the height of the VDI craze, everyone was saying, oh my gosh, VDI is the future, it's only same OS and everything, so I thought terminal server was sort of dead a little bit. But then that drawing that we showed earlier with all the arrows, I thought, hey, if all of our Windows applications in the data center are just single applications being delivered and then mixed on the client with everything else, isn't that better to do in terminal server? Because it's just lower overhead and everything. So that's why I was saying that terminal server, in this future web app-loving world, maybe terminal server's best days were ahead of it. Because basically every single Windows application that's out there, why wouldn't we just put that on terminal server and deliver it out from the data center as a seamless terminal server app? So
this is the same time frame too that you had your if you're simple enough for single image VDI, then why not just do terminal services, right?
Yeah, exactly.
This is Brian's terminal server.
This is what led to us thinking about persistent as VDI and shared as terminal server. So this article is 3 years old. I wrote an article a couple months ago, or last month, I guess, less than a month ago, that said, will single app desktop VMs. So like Windows 7 VMs for single app, will that replace terminal server in the future? And that's what I'm kind of wondering about. So instead of 3 years ago, I'm thinking, all of these single Windows apps in the data center, no-brainer terminal server. But now I'm thinking, all these single user apps from the data center, maybe single user VDI, or single app VDI.
This is one of those things that used to fall into the terminal server land because we could get so much higher density on terminal server. So it was worth the extra effort to go through tweaking the application, tweaking the server, locking it down, that sort of a thing. But now, as time goes by, which I think you're getting to with the hardware in that, we're seeing that the density numbers are starting to level off, where we could get much more density with terminal server than VDI. Now those are coming awfully close together. There's still cost associated with it with VDI that maybe isn't associated with terminal services, but even those are coming radically down as well. So the world has changed, and that's why our view has changed.
Because the hypervisors have gotten better. And the hypervisors are, when you have a lot of VMs that are the same, essentially, it's all like, so let's say that we're talking about single app VMs. I have 100 users. Now we're looking at 100 copies of Windows 7, each with a seamless application, and that's it. So it's kind of like our little VM appliance model we were talking about, but in the data center being remoted down. The hypervisors are getting much more efficient at running lots of copies. We can have memory page sharing across it. We are seeing things like the storage, the storage, as I mentioned yesterday, also, the single instance block level storage. So in this is a case.
Yeah, it's not just the hypervisors. It's storage, it's platforms, VDI platforms, it's everything.
And this is one of those cases where I'm not talking about VDI for persistent. I'm saying if you have your old ERP application from the data center, you make one VDI VM for that, and then you spawn off instance clones that are throwaway because it's just for that one user for that one app. And when they shut it down, it just disappears, and a new one is spawned up the instant that someone else uses it. So in this case, the hypervisors and the storage is getting very good at supporting that. We also have the fact that the truth from before is if I go to Windows desktop VMs in the data center, then it's just one sort of set of technology to worry about. I only have to make my application work in Windows 7, and I can install it in the same way there as everything. I don't have to worry about, even for licenses, as if I have SA, but I don't need to buy separate terminal server CALs.
And one skill set to manage it all, too, because the skill set that manages desktops is not the same skill set required to manage terminal services. Terminal services, you need this hybrid server guy, application guy, desktop guy who can figure out how all of this stuff interacts and can regression test and all of this. And if you're just running Windows 7 VMs in the data center, it's the same skill set, whether it's the break fix guy that goes out to the desk, or whether it's a desktop in a VM in the data center.
And single application VMs means that I don't have the application compatibility issues, and I can give the team, like if you're responsible for this Oracle application, then you can own that VM, and if you break it, it don't affect other people. It's the same things with, we were talking about the single app VMs on clients, right? I don't really have to worry about personalization, and a lockdown desktop is okay because the users aren't really getting to the desktop or anything like that. So so I'm wondering, and this is, there's no like conclusion to this. It's just an interesting thought exercise that if my data center-based VMs, or my data center-based traditional Windows applications, a year ago I would have said terminal server for sure. Now I may be thinking about just doing that as a bunch of VMs and spawning copies as needed. So now my terminal server versus terminal server versus VDI, in the context of that future world with all the arrows, I could actually see a bunch of VDI instances. All right, really recommends from the gentleman in the back. Thank you, +1. Say again, please.
What you just talking about, I really recommend that idea because it works really, really well, and it's quick, it's agile, and it delivers very quickly.
Yeah, it's quick, it's easy, and you have all the other issues to deal with, like application integration. Do you have to put multiple apps on the same VM? And but that you have sort of with everything. So something we're thinking about. All right, we're right on schedule. Nice. So that's topic 2. Oh, please.
Question about the single app VM. Would you keep Explorer as the shell and run the application on top, or would you replace Explorer with the app as the shell so it can keep running?
Yeah, the question is, would you keep Explorer as your shell and run the application on top, or would you replace Explorer instead of in the registry, change your shell to be your application? Great question. I would say it depends on a few things. So first of all, Citrix today does support single published apps out of desktop VMs, and you can use their whole infrastructure to sort of support that. If you get into shell replacement, as a concept, I like that. I don't know how many of you have looked into this. You have to tweak around with the registry a little bit because there's certain things that happen that it tries to do with the shell, and like the way that when you exit it, it'll log you out of your session, even if it's a single user environment. So I don't know if I don't know if one way makes more sense than the others. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts. Certainly replacing as a shell. I mean, because the thing is, if you replace Explorer as the shell, people can still get to Explorer. There still are ways to get to launch Task Manager and then launch Explorer and everything.
And there's still lockdowns that you would have.
I was just going to say, right, but this could be a totally locked down environment, and so I wonder if it even really matters. Especially if you're using policy to lock down so they can't launch Task Manager and things like that.
Just depends what the interface
it may
looks
not
like
make
too.
a difference.
If it confuses the user to have the Explorer there, then
maybe
you get rid of it. Or
maybe not running Explorer saves you some resources. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good question. All right. So next topic. So the next one is this a little bit unrelated to these first two. It's about like the security perimeter and how you deal with sort of VPNs and trusted versus untrusted networks in your environment.
This is one of our more epic arguments that we had during a BrianMadden.com podcast.
Yeah.
Although we get into these situations where we argue the same point with different words, and we can do that for hours. Because what have you been called? A right fighter?
Oh yeah. By girlfriends in the past. Do you know the term right fighter?
Past girlfriends.
Yeah. You fight to be right, and even if you're not. So I did an article also last month called Rethinking Network Security. And it says, all of your on-premises Wi-Fi users are actually remote users. And at BriForum here in London last year, I did a session on what now, and I pulled this content from that. But if you haven't seen that, I'm not a network guy, I'm not a security guy, so apologies. But here's everything in networking and security of the past 20 years in one slide. In the old days, work was a building. It was a place where you went, a place where users showed up each day. We had servers inside that building. We had users both inside the building and also sort of outside and working remote. And our security boundary we put around the wall of the building itself. So the idea was if you were inside the building, connecting from inside the building, we trusted you. If you were connecting from the outside, you were not trusted. And so the problem with this, though, and this is traditional sort of network security, VPN, et cetera. The problem with this in today's world is I'm sure you all understand, is it's too easy for users to bring untrusted devices onto the network. And we had that FUIT session last year. There's so many examples, because even people say things like, oh, you can turn on network access protection and look at your devices. But then I think David Stafford was the one. There you are. Yeah, this is the printer thing where he's like, oh yeah, network access protection? What kind of network access protection client do you have on your network printers? Well, they don't have one. Well, how do network printers get on the network? Oh, they make an exception for MAC address. Great. Walk to the printer, test page, zhink, there's a MAC address. I change the MAC address in my laptop now, and I'm on. Because today's network is all layer 2 switched and everything. You can have 2 MAC addresses. The networks don't care.
Now, to be fair, David worked at Cisco, where they actually knew how to do that stuff. But the people today are more and more savvy and can figure that out.
Yeah, you put a printer on a separate VLAN that only goes to a certain place. But again, it's the game of whack-a-mole. You're always going on.
Well, they just knew what MAC addresses were.
Yeah. And then, of course, so you can't trust everything that's inside your building. But also, today's world, the opposite is true, where if we automatically assume everyone in the outside world is untrusted, then we make them jump through a lot of extra hoops. Users aren't going to want to, like, I'll use TechTarget, for example. We have like this old VPN that does client-side scans, and it's just a mess. We have to jump through so many hoops to get on the VPN. I have every incentive to not ever get on the VPN. So if our company makes us so untrusted in the outside world, that's, again, we are driven to FUIT, because I'm going to use Dropbox and all this kind of stuff because it's way easier than actually launching Safari because it doesn't work with Chrome for our VPN client and all that sort of thing. So this whole making the boundary around the building, not just is it that untrusted stuff is inside our walls, but we say we don't trust anyone on the outside of our walls, and we make it very difficult for the users, and we sort of drive them to their own devices. So the proposal is, instead of making your security boundary around the actual building, you make your security boundary around the actual server resources, the actual resources you're trying to protect. And in doing so, the boundary of the building now disappears and is completely irrelevant. So users access your resources in the exact same way, whether they are in your building network or whether they're outside in the world. By the way, someone in the comment of the article where I described this had a great point. Your VDI servers, they go out here because they're in user land when users are doing whatever it is that they're doing. So they are not inside. The VDI servers, these are desktops, and terminal servers are desktops. They go out in that world. And so in doing this, that's where the article title was, hey, all of your Wi-Fi users should be remote users, because it shouldn't matter if they're Wi-Fi, in the company or outside. Another benefit, by the way, of when you do this, now I can actually add more protected resources in multiple office locations or cloud-based Amazon Web Services, wherever. And it doesn't really matter where my actual servers are, because users are going to authenticate to all of it in the same way and work in the same way from everywhere.
And these guys are still talking together. There's another network involved here too. I mean, but for these guys, we're talking about the Wi-Fi users, the networks that we can actually put our devices on, period. I mean, so if there's IT-specific networks, we're all IT people, so we can access these things. We don't necessarily have to jump through those hoops. But for user land, for any user-based desktop, like you said, even the VDI desktops, this is what it looks like from their perspective.
And so doing this, so there's a bunch of advantages to sort of taking this approach. And the first advantage is you don't have to police devices. You don't have to do that thing where, okay, I got to certify these devices are online. And was that in David's session yesterday when he said, how many of you, when an iPhone came out, got an iPhone for testing purposes? And then you try to say, oh, iPhone 5 just came out, but that's not supported yet because we have to test it. And if you get into this whole thing, like there's so many devices coming in so fast, the idea of saying all these devices are allowed, all these devices are not allowed, that's a fool's errand. You'll never, ever stay on top of that game, and the users are going to bring them in anyway, regardless of whether it's actually allowed or not. So if you take this approach, you don't have to get in the business of approving individual devices for everything. The other advantage is it's the same user experience from everywhere. So it's not like, okay, you're in the company, you access the applications via this way. You're outside the company, you access it via this way. Unless you're on the VPN already, then you use this URL, and it's just different from wherever you happen to be.
And this is where we argued in our epic argument, was that especially at the time, I don't want to have to jump through extra hoops if I'm used to not jumping through hoops in the first place. So if I'm sitting inside the perimeter of the company on the original diagram, all of a sudden you're telling me that now I have to connect to a VPN to get to my applications or to get to my data, or I have to do different things, more things in a more complex way. And so a user doesn't want to have to worry about a VPN. If they don't know about a VPN, that's better, because that way they don't get confused and they don't call you and blame something on the VPN even though it's their printer that's not working or something like that. So at the time, though, this was probably 2 years ago that we first started having this discussion. At the time, that was going to be the situation. But now, we've got these application-specific VPNs. We've got things the Citrix receiver can do now that each application you connect to has its own VPN connection that's transparent to the user. The user doesn't know it exists, but it's still there behind the scenes. And that's what gets us through to those servers. So the technology to make this an acceptable experience exists now, and it didn't before.
Yeah, we can make, right, like, so this, to make this work, this is not whatever VPN TechTarget uses from 1997. This is, we have to use like modern stuff, but it is possible to have sort of full VPN protected to get into our environments that works on all platforms, and it's pretty easy. So the other thing that's nice about this is no worrying about rogue 3G and 4G connections, because that's another thing that...
Yeah, because if the entire network, apart from the data center, is treated as unmanaged, untrusted, then it doesn't matter if somebody bridges a connection somewhere because we've already treated it as if it's untrusted.
Yeah, and so like, yeah, I'm not having to police like, okay, don't turn on this on, and then the corporate data, like it's just, I'm treating everyone sort of the same. And then, so again, I mentioned that before, is you can wrap similar security, whatever you do to provide access to the systems you're trying to secure, that's kind of the same everywhere. So whether it's an Amazon cloud or some hosting provider or your site or your backup site or whatever, you can put these things everywhere, and the users are accessing all the resources they need in the same way, regardless of where they are, whether they're in the company or out in the world.
Right.
So there's a lot of advantages to doing this. Of course, though, there are also disadvantages, which is, I mean, you flat out, you need more VPN licenses because now all your users are on the VPN essentially all the time. And so if you were only using, like again, I go to TechTarget, when it snows in Boston, which is where our company is headquartered, and it snows a lot there.
I can't sign in because I live in Nebraska.
Because all the Boston users wake up first.
Yeah.
And so they all work from home and all VPN in, and then they send company-wide emails that say, like, if you're only using the VPN for Outlook, please log out to free up licenses for users who need the actual enterprise applications. I'm so tempted to reply all and explain how to set up Outlook Anywhere. But
It only works on Macs, though.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you need more VPN licenses. In your premises, like on your company, you need updated Wi-Fi gear. We have the same thing also. So like the iPad users in TechTarget Boston, they get their iPads connected first thing in the morning when they come in because they're connecting via Wi-Fi, and there's a certain, like, I don't know if they just run out of DHCP addresses or something like that. But it's, this isn't your Wi-Fi access point from 10 years ago. We probably need, like, I don't know if you know, like Ruckus Wireless, these Wi-Fi access points that have like 15 different antennas, and they can actually have different cones of radio signals to different parts in the room, and they can, you have to have, obviously, they can support a lot more addresses and a lot more devices and connections and everything, because you're going to have probably 3 or 4 connections for every single user. So it's just saying that all your cubicle land is now all Wi-Fi, all wide open. You're going to need better Wi-Fi gear probably than what you existing have.
You know how they deal with this at the TechTarget office, or how I deal with it? When I fly there, I arrive in the afternoon usually, and I can't get on the Wi-Fi. So I actually have in a drawer somewhere there a router that I just take out and plug into the network jack under the cubicle, and then I have my own Wi-Fi there because, again, we just have a perimeter on the outside of the building for security. So it's an FUIT that benefits me.
We do that in, we actually do that in San Francisco also, because
that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But but you know what the SSID? So we share a floor with Wells Fargo, the bank. So we just named the SSID of our access point Wells Fargo, so that way. And
we picture all the IT guys in the Wells Fargo office scurrying around looking for the rogue access point.
But Howard, our IT guy in San Francisco, if he sees an access point, an SSID called Wells Fargo pop up, he's not going to go looking around our desks for it. We'll bleep that out of the video.
Hi, Howard.
So
he doesn't want.
So that's a disadvantage. And it's all the networking gear. So like if you're going to do this, you need QoS, and because you don't want the one user going to YouTube and downloading everything. So all the traffic shaping, probably like the VLANs per user, so that one rogue user can't see what other users are doing and everything. So it's, again,
they don't have it here, but I've been to conferences where I can't see the guy sitting next to me. Here, if somebody has their firewall open, you can see them no matter where they're connected. But yeah, I've definitely
when you go to Citrix Synergy, since Citrix makes all this stuff. Like you can't do screen, like you don't see each other's computers. You can't airdrop and stuff because they have, I don't know what they make it work with.
That's why we call it VLANs per user. Does anybody know what that's, is that is there a name for that feature? VLANs okay, so we're going to go with VLANs per.
I mean, so the main disadvantage is this is just more expensive. So to make this happen, more licenses, more Wi-Fi, better products, better everything. So it's going to cost more. But again, I argue that this is money spent that actually has real results, because if you do it the old way, you're not, you say, oh, we just don't, the iPads are not allowed. Well, they're still there anyway. So it's like, do you want to be living in denial, or do you want to spend more money and actually have something that's real? Yeah. There's 3, when I presented this multiple times, and there's people say, no, this will never work because there's objections. And I'll print all 3 objections here, and because I think all 3 objections that I've heard don't really apply. So the first objection that people say is, well, but then one rogue user could take down the whole network. If I just let users bring in anything and they got viruses and whatever, one rogue user can like destroy the entire network and infect everybody. And
that's all it takes anyway.
Well, in the old environment, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I argue, having Wi-Fi open to the public, where one road user cannot take down everyone. I mean, football stadiums have it. Like Starbucks has Wi-Fi for all the users, and they figured it out. Like if in the hotel, if the hotel can figure out how to make Wi-Fi where one user doesn't take down everyone, then so can we.
This is the first hotel that we've ever had BriForum at, though, that hasn't been completely just downed because of all the BriForum attendees there. So it's this is good job for the hotel.
Maybe they bought this new stuff, and that's the thing. This is solved by having modern networking gear, probably built after 2010. This is not from your old, 10-year-old kind of stuff. Yeah. So I don't think that's a real objection. The second thing is people say, but if I have all these devices, how do I support all this kind of stuff? And I say, but again, I don't think that's a real valid objection because you're supporting all this stuff anyway, and you've got users, especially if I'm saying users are walking in a door with whatever they have, and I don't know what they have, how do I support it? Well, that's exactly how it always has been for home access. Like you've always had use Citrix to deliver or like VPNs for your home users, and you don't know what piece of shit computer they have at home and that sort of thing. And you support the home users today. Sometimes you try and help them. Sometimes you shrug your shoulders and say, buy new computers. I mean, whatever we do today, this isn't new. Supporting devices that we haven't bought and provisioned for the users, that's not a new phenomenon. Again,
and if you do this and say, okay, you guys can bring in your own devices now, you can add the stipulation that says, but you're on your own when they bring in their new crazy-ass things.
We'll give you, we'll try to fix your problem for 5 minutes. If we can't fix it after 5 minutes, expertsexchange.com, which you can expense.
Use your corporate card.
Yeah. And the third objection is people say, this is crazy. I can never allow non-trusted devices on the corporate network. Policy, regulation, I can never allow non-trusted on the corporate network. I'm saying, fine, this is the way we solve this. We redefine the corporate network. Because remember, in my mind for this, user land in cubicles, that's not the corporate network. And again, if we can allow non-trusted, non-owned devices through our VPN for people from home, there's no difference to allowing that in the company. We just have to.
Especially, I mean, how many people give their users admin rights in cubicle land? Nobody's raising their hand? Wow, in the US, it's like. So, okay, so maybe here it's not that big of a deal. But if users have admin rights, they can do whatever they want anyway to the machine, whether you manage it or not.
Take it right out of the domain.
They're already untrusted, yeah.
So like I said, it's just a redefinition. Wi-Fi land is not corporate network. Wi-Fi land is public. And if you just change that mindset and build your infrastructure around that, we like that is the way to view end-user computing moving forward. So that's topic 3. Topic 4.
User-installed apps.
So this whole idea of do we have to support user-installed apps? And we're defining user-installed apps as these are apps that are not provisioned by IT, but the user goes and finds it, installs it, does it on their own. Historically, so in the traditional desktop world, we've always had that, especially if users have admin rights. Like they have laptops and they can go install stuff, and it occasionally breaks things when we figure it out. But traditionally in the world of Windows desktops and laptops, users have always been able to install their own apps. And so do you remember the VDI vision? I was big on this myself like 5 years ago of how we're all going to use shared locked down images. Like the idea was, and within VDI, our OS was going to be a layer on top of that. And then all of our applications were going to be layers and virtualized bubbles on top of our OS. And remember, the idea with this is locked down shared Windows layer. And then we do all of our user environment profile virtualization with AppSense or RES or one of those kinds of things. All of our applications we wrap in AppV or ThinApp and just stream them down on demand. So every user logs into the same generic copy of Windows. And then we use user personalization plus app virtualization and on demand customize that instance of Windows. And the reason we wanted to do that is because that's what allows us to use the shared image for Windows. So we can reclone Windows, recompose on the fly. We can update patches. We can swap out that Windows layer, but the user layer and the app layers are not touched. So that was the vision of VDI like 5 years ago. And the only problem with that is how do we support user-installed apps? Because if a user installs an app, then they get the fresh VM next time they log in, that user-installed app is gone. And so the question was, okay, so do we have some kind of application virtualization that like there's some different products. Liquidware Labs has something. AppSense,
AppSense.
Strata apps.
There's Cedo. There's a couple other ones too. They're smaller that are they're running user mode, but then there's also the layering based user installed apps that are actually other virtual machine
like
layers.
Ringcube and Winova even and
Unidesk.
Yeah, Unidesk. Yeah. Because the idea is we want to have a way that users can still install their own applications, but isolate that into some kind of bubble so that we can still swap out the OS image behind the scenes and the user installed apps are still there. So user installed apps for me was a major fantasy goal of VDI.
Of non-persistent VDI too.
Which is what we had to do because we didn't have all this single instance block stuff. So user installed apps 5 years ago was critical to me for that reason. User installed apps were critical. So that was one reason that user installed apps were critical.
The other reason was the whole admin rights thing that we talked about. So we all know what happens when we give our users admin rights, right? They start to do weird shit.
This is like when users let them do whatever they want.
Yeah, and so if we can alleviate the need to have admin rights on the machines, which clearly is not a problem here, but is in the US, that means that we can be more flexible. We can still give them the ability to install their applications, but they don't need to be admins to do that. That makes our job a lot easier as IT guys because now we don't have to support them doing crazy things.
Such as, so when users are left to their own environments, are you familiar with this product? Wheelmate Laptop Steering Wheel Desk. This is, like I said, this is why we want to take away admin rights from users.
When users can do whatever they want to their car, they do this, which results in this. This is, if you go to Amazon.com, maybe it's replicated for co.uk, but you can actually see that it's a real thing. And with Amazon, you can upload customer photos. And so there's a lot of really great ones, like watching Avatar while mowing over an old lady. That looks like it's somewhere in Europe.
This all is completely, this is our view of users with admin rights.
Uh-oh. I hit a keynote button that I don't know.
You hit the blank button.
No, I didn't.
You hit the suicide button.
I don't have a suicide button.
Rip that thing off.
I did.
Let's see here. So
I don't know keynote.
This clicker remote, 4 buttons: forward, back, blank. The fourth button. So what's the fourth most common button you need on a remote? The fourth button here, end presentation. Like why? I got 4 buttons and that's the one you're giving me? It's a suicide button. it's a trap. So. But all of this kind of stuff that we're talking about when users are their own things. And now we recognize, of course, this is just for users, that they can't be trusted to do whatever they want. We as IT pros, I mean,
we can do it. We know what we're doing.
Yeah, we're going to be safe only. And this is actually, I want to point out the law he's breaking. I'm not making this up. The law he's breaking is driving while not using hands-free on his phone.
There is no law. Who would be dumb enough to do that? Nobody's used that yet to crash.
Yeah, it's called Darwin's law.
Yeah.
But see, it's too late because you already have kids. So that was like the background. So Gabe and I both want user installed apps to work. I want it so we can use the layering with non-persistent disks.
Yeah.
Gabe wants it so we can take away admin rights from our users, but still give them the ability to install their own applications so I don't have all these bullshit help desk calls to install Mickey Mouse Player and that kind of thing. So that was our background fantasy for wanting user installed apps for the past 5 years. But now, I did this article just a couple of days ago, earlier this week, where I said, I wonder if user installed apps, I feel like we don't have a good user installed app solution yet. There's some that work in certain scenarios, right? But I thought, I wonder if it's too late. Like maybe we don't actually need sort of real user installed apps anymore.
Well, you call out there. I gave a session with Kevin Goodman a few years ago at BriForum, just giving an overview of all the user installed application solutions. It was right when Strata Apps was coming out from AppSense. Unidesk had already had theirs. Mocha 5 has layering with user-installed applications, and so this was very hot at the time, and so we gave a presentation about this, and there were 60 or 80 people in the audience, and I asked if anyone was doing it, and not a single person raised their hand. I asked if anyone was planning on doing it, and not a single person raised their hand. They were all just there to learn what the landscape looked like. And I'm fairly confident
It did not look good.
that if I ask
Barren.
here if anybody does user-installed apps or has plans to use user-installed app solutions that are either layering or in user mode, that not many hands are going to go up. Does anybody use user-installed apps?
So
Just
we
a
have
few.
2 out of 50 or whatever. So I wonder if it doesn't matter because so again, going back to what I was presenting yesterday, all VDI now is persistent or can be persistent. So user-installed apps for me was a big deal because I wanted these shared layer kind of things. But now that I have all these storage solutions with single instance block level, I'm going to manage my VDI desktops just like I manage my traditional desktops. So if I have, even if my users don't have admin rights, I can still have individual users. So maybe user-installed apps is I install it, I do that help desk call to install Mickey Mouse Player, but then it's there forever for that user. If that's my solution for laptops, I can do that solution in VDI. So for me personally, I don't need user-installed apps anymore because now I can do persistent VDI, and that solved my problem.
Well, the challenge was non-persistent VDI, though. That's what this new technology has advanced for us, is the ability to give a reliable non-persistent VDI that's cheap, right? Because we had a big...
Well, that's what we were hoping for, was that this user-installed apps would enable us to do non-persistent VDI. But I'm saying now we don't have to do non-persistent VDI. And I'm saying persistent VDI, I like that because it's no different than all my laptops I have today. And if I have 5,000 users using laptops today that I'm supporting, I can still support 5,000 persistent VDI. That's no different.
Yeah. So that doesn't solve the admin rights problem, though. So what about a user that still needs to or wants to use their own applications? So that's where some of those user mode ones that I talked about, the AppSense, Liquidware Labs, those solutions, that Cedo I think is the other one, those solutions run, they don't use layering, so we don't need virtualization on the back end to do that, so it works on virtual and physical desktops. And it gives us the ability to let the users install an application that basically just captures those files and puts them somewhere else. And if you turn that agent off as an admin, their apps go away. And if you turn it back on, their apps show up again.
And
you can upgrade the OS, you can do all sorts of things, and it's not nearly as complex.
And I've always said things like, yeah, but the problem with these things is they don't support every single application. And if I was using shared non-persistent VDI, that was a problem because I had to support every application or build into the base image for all my users. Now I'm making multiple base images, and now it's like, ugh, why am I doing VDI in the first place? Or why am I doing shared?
But what applications are we actually talking about?
That's where I'm going with this.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing persistent VDI, all the app users, everything sticks, I can still take away users' admin rights and give them one of these third-party products that maybe doesn't work for everything, but it works for 80%. Okay, great. Users can install 80% of their apps on their own. They can get Firefox and plugins and that kind of stuff. And now the apps where I, as an admin, actually have to go to their desktop, admin rights, install the app, then they run it with user level access. Then I can do that for the few percentages that they're left over.
Yeah, there's privilege elevation solutions and things like that too.
Yeah, so I can and because my desktops are persistent, that's a one-time thing that I have to do, and then I don't have to touch it again. The other bonus for this that we have is, and I think this is something not to be discounted. I wrote about this a little while ago. Users have iPads and phones and smartphones and all this kind of stuff that actually takes away a lot of the pressure of these user-installed apps. Because, 5 years ago, if I took away users, if I gave all my users a locked-down desktop that they couldn't change anything or install anything, they would have flipped out. It would have been crazy. The protests from the users on not being able to do anything. But now a lot of these, like I said, the Mickey Mouse bullshit apps, they run on their iPads and their phones. And
hell, they can bring in their own laptops, especially if we reorganize the network the way that we talked about before.
That's true. But I mean, so the thing is, a lot of I gotta have this app, but really it's like to look at my kids' daycare center, video feed, and all this kind of stuff. They can do all that on their iPad now and their phones. And so now the only apps that users want that they can't do on their phones or their iPads probably are like more legitimate business applications where I can use my admin rights, install them on the machine, and then log off and have them log back on with regular user rights. So again, I feel like the whole user-installed apps, we need the perfect, like the silver bullet user-installed app solution. I don't think we really need that anymore. We have ones out there that work for 80%, and that's fine. But the market has changed, and so if anyone was going to build that silver bullet solution, it's too late.
There's so many solutions out there too. somebody has to be asking for these, you would think. But then again, when we ask, nobody raises their hand. So I wonder why they exist. Maybe just because they can do it.
Well, I mean, but to your point, I mean, it does help.
The admin rights, yeah.
It does help with admin rights. And the reason they exist is because a lot of these, remember, we were living in this fantasy world for a long time that VDI was all about shared images.
So you're saying what products people create are not necessarily based on what their customers actually want?
Well, because it's still too hard. Because like I said, no user-installed app solution could support 100% of apps. And if you're using a shared base image, you have to support 100% of apps.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you don't support 100% of apps, you're putting apps in the base image, and now you're blowing up your whole model. Please.
I think it's actually the other way around. Because it's so easy to package now, relatively speaking. Take it 5 years, 6 years back. We had to create MSIs and all that. It's so easy to package now that we turn over stuff.
That's a really great
good
point. I'll say again for the camera. The comment is, actually, maybe the model's flipped. It's packaging apps is easier now. In the old days, it was Package Studio, and you were using MSIs and like nightmare. Now there's automated solutions. Even repackaging apps is so much more easy that if a user has a request for an application they need, we can turn around the packaging process and add it to our software distribution platform, which with much less effort today than we needed to a few years ago. So maybe users don't actually have to be doing things on their own.
And then we can deploy that app to different
And for the
platforms
bullshit apps, they're on their iPad.
Yeah.
I think it's also about I take what you're saying about persistent desktops, but I actually do quite like non-persistent desktops. And there was reasons we wanted to do it. It was difficult, but it is becoming more easier with the way we're packaging apps. So if you're saying that your task workers and your knowledge workers, they suit a non-persistent type desktop, it's just these other people, the IT departments, the developers, the people that are more technical, then maybe those other solutions do have more of a reason to go out.
That's a great point, which I'll repeat so you can all hear. He's saying that persistent. He actually likes he likes non-persistent VDI, and if you can make that work, that's great. I should add, yes, I like that's the goal, because if we can get non-persistent, of course, that's easier. What's nice with VDI is we don't have to go to non-persistent, but even if it's an 80-20 thing, if we can get 80% of our users on non-persistent, then let's go for it. And the ones, if we still want VDI for those who require persistent, we can now do that today, which is really cool.
What about the sort of Citrix vDisk approach? So personal vDisk.
So departmental apps. So
yeah, so that's the Citrix vDisk, like the Ringcube stuff, and for departmental. Webster says, let the record show. It's
it's the same challenges when we're talking about departmental applications. If we're talking about user files, Citrix breaks that kind of into two different groups, right? So, but if we're talking about departmental, it's really the same challenges with user-installed applications, especially when we talk about trying to maintain separate layers of departmental applications, all while being able to shove in a new or updated operating system underneath that. All these applications have hooks down into the OS, and even if those are virtualized, if something changes in the OS, we still have application compatibility problems. We could have new DLLs that step on each other, for instance, drivers, that sort of a thing. And so it's the same challenges, and so it's the same general reception like Carl has there with Boo.
How many have evaluated Citrix, the layering, the vDisk stuff from Citrix? Look around, look in the hands. How many of you love it and are using it currently? Hands high.
Yeah.
One person doing this. It's the thing, like my sense is it's not, the product is not quite as versatile as the marketing material might lead it to be. Yeah. Yeah, please.
Yeah, during all of this, talked about or touched on application virtualization, user mobility. I haven't talked anything around type 1 hypervisors at the client layer. Do you think that that's just something that is a non-starter, so Zen client?
So the question is, how about type 1 hypervisors? So a new topic, type 1 hypervisors in the client layer. Thoughts on that? I don't know if we have time. Maybe that's a birds of a feather conversation.
Type 1 in general, I don't know that it matters whether type 1 or type 2. There's a management aspect of type 1 that, because now you can actually have some device management capabilities. So that's maybe the only way that I would go down the path of trying to differentiate between type 1 and type 2, because otherwise we're still just talking about wrapping Windows and the applications together and deploying it as one monolithic brick.
To me, type 1 client is a very specific niche for company-owned assets that have certain requirements around compatibility or security. My worldview, remember, is we're doing this new networking model and not worrying about devices. And I can't not worry about devices and have type 1 hypervisors. So if I have to support type 1, I'm looking at it for a specific, like I said, use case around some security need or compatibility need or something like that. And clearly that also only works on company-owned devices, because I can't imagine inflicting a type 1 client hypervisor on a BYO laptop or something like that. All right, our last topic in 10 minutes and 46 seconds is around data. So like user data and sort of how we deal with data and files and all this user kind of created stuff.
This is one of those. This is another one that we've had conversations about. This is the classic example of the kind of conversation that he and I have where we both say the same thing for 20 minutes over and over and over again. Because the way that we define data and what's worth protecting and what's not worth protecting, especially as we bring in the consumerization and FUIT, we get mixed up on the terms, or we just use them so broadly that it gets confusing. So this is the last 10 minutes. We just kind of want to reset that conversation and talk about exactly what we mean.
When I talked about consumerization 2 years ago at BriForum and talked about different solutions, I said, look, for the data out there, there's two types of data. There's sort of corporate-created institutional data, and then there's like user-created data. And there's a lot of solutions out there to try to protect all this data. It's not just encryption, but it's DRM and DLP and all these scans and analysis and all that kind of stuff. My personal viewpoint is this user-created data, we cannot protect that. So 2 years ago I said, we can't protect it, so don't even bother trying. Because if you can't protect it, why bother? Like, you don't need DLP and all this kind of thing, because if it's user-created data, they can use their own laptop or their own copy of Office and everything that they need and work outside the system. So if it's too easy for users to work outside the system, we have that circle the wagons. I don't know if that's an expression that's used here. Like, just protect, like redouble your efforts on the institutional data that's being generated from your corporate systems. And if you need to share spreadsheets, you can do it via published Excel with all this mapping disabled and cut and pasting disabled and everything. But I say this user data, don't even bother trying to protect it.
And that's why I took issue with it.
You can't.
Well, and that's why I took issue is because there's still really important, critical user-created data out there. There's contracts, there's regulatory information, that kind of a thing that doesn't come out of institutional systems, ERP systems, or that's not stored in databases only and is only shown on a screen. So there's important user-created content too that also should be protected. We just can't.
And so for the past couple of years, I have said literally for that user-protected content, we can't protect that. Now yesterday, did anybody see David Stafford's session about, I don't remember what it was called, like IT then and now and this kind of stuff? The way that he explained it was way better than the way that, thank you for that, David Stafford, the way I explained it. So this is from him yesterday. What David said, for this user-created content, the way that he phrased it is it's the user's choice as to whether that data is protected by IT or not. Mm-hmm. So it's true that we can't force it. It's the user's choice now. Like when the user is making that new presentation, writing that new proposal, it's their call if they make it in their own Google Docs on the iPad or if they make it in the corporate DRM Office SharePoint kind of environment.
Or if they store it in their Dropbox or store it on their file server, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So, and to Gabe's point, so I was saying just, hey, user's choice, we can't protect it. So screw it, don't even try.
This, by the way, is our dynamic. Sweeping declaration guy here, and then, well, maybe that's my role.
Because in this case, right, because in this case you said, just because you can't control it, doesn't mean you shouldn't try.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, if we don't try at all, then there's absolutely zero chance of protecting that information. So we have to try a little bit, because then that at least gives us some small chance. Now, how hard you try has a direct relationship to how much success you're going to have at protecting these things, because your competition right now is Dropbox.
And
go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, like David's in his session yesterday had one of my favorite IT quotes of all time, which is he said, like all talking about the IT, worried about data leakage. He says, no, IT in this model should not be worried about data leakage. The IT should pray for data ingestion, right? They should pray that the users, like all data is sort of by definition leaked that users are creating. IT needs to pray that users choose to put it in the IT system versus that's the worry. The worry is not our IT system data getting it out. It's please what you're doing, put it into our system so that we can policy and control and maintain and everything.
100% of the information that you and I create exists in Google Drive and Dropbox, because there is no solution to get that information into TechTarget besides signing into the VPN and using some HTML upload functionality. Yeah.
Selling onto a product called Kite Drive, which is enterprise Dropbox. We've started piloting that, and it's really, really good. Users really like it.
And that's the point.
Yeah, it's the first thing we found that's ever near to Dropbox.
Yeah, and there's the Watchdogs is another one there's a lot of enterprise Dropbox-like products, many of these with full on-premises solution that can do great stuff. And this goes back to the thing. If we do a product that's like an enterprise-like Dropbox that has DRM and this encryption and all that stuff in it, at least we're giving the users a fighting chance. If our company started using ShareFile or Watchdogs, one of these things, we would probably use that instead of using Dropbox. We're just using Dropbox because our alternative is an SMB file share behind a 1997 VPN. And so
I think it depends on who you're protecting against. Are you protecting against your own users, or are you protecting against a third party? Is someone leaving their laptop on a train and you want to make sure they can't get the data out of that, or are you protecting against your user taking a copy of your data to a computer?
yeah, and the comment is it depends on who you're protecting against. Data loss versus data theft versus outside hacking theft. There's a lot of different what you actually do here. But the key is, where I was saying that a year ago, don't even try, I'm changed my mind. I'm saying, no, go ahead and, it's true still, we can't force it, but let's at least try. Because at least we had some chance. And Jack Madden has a great, he illustrates this, I don't know if he did this in his session, where he talks about the capabilities of IT. So this is like the old days. Like this small bar here is how much capabilities we had, users at home had, and here's what we had at work. So like work was way more capabilities than home. And over the years, as home technology got more and more, all the technology moved up, and
this is user capabilities too. The users got more intelligent, more savvy with the technology.
But then, of course, at some point it flipped, and now we've got more capabilities that users can get more capabilities. When Dropbox and Google Docs add collaboration, users get access to that instantly. And so what Jack says is the delta between the home capabilities and the work capabilities, this is where FUIT happens. And so our goal in IT is to minimize that delta. We're probably never going to be, we can't ever react as quickly as consumer services will, but we can at least kind of get closer than maybe we were if we're just providing like super old stuff.
And we do that by embracing it, not just closing off or pretending that it doesn't exist. We do that by embracing it and try to give the users what they need, because otherwise they're just going to go elsewhere and get it. So if we can reclaim some of those rogue users.
Now, what's interesting,
get them to ingest their data.
What's interesting about this is when Gabe and I had this idea for presenting this segment of this presentation, we have everything we just presented was what Gabe's idea was to talk about for this session. My idea to talk about is this article I wrote a few months ago, where I said, who cares about Dropbox, SkyDrive, ShareFile, all these kinds of things? Because we're moving to a world where traditional files don't matter anymore. So the irony is all what we were just talking about getting our file, we're defining data as files. But think about it. Gabe and I have been using Dropbox for like 5 years. What we use Dropbox for is much less today than it was 5 years ago. Because we now are using Google Docs for everything. What kind of files types does Google Docs have? Like doesn't file, I can export, but I don't do that, right? Like Google Docs, they just live there in Google Doc world. Evernote, I use Evernote for everything. What's a file type for Evernote? I don't know, it's like Evernote Cloud Sync thing.
Right, there's the item that we click on, but
it's not a file. My Evernote stuff is not in Dropbox. My Google Docs are not in Dropbox. My photos and MP3s, those are files, but those are all cloud-based, kind of synced anyway. Honestly, what do we use Dropbox for now? We use it for, we're still using presentations in PowerPoint and Keynote, so we create presentation files.
Videos.
And videos, like when we shoot videos and put them in Dropbox so Justin can get them. So we're using Dropbox as PowerPoint sharing and video sharing. So, and you can almost imagine that world moving forward.
Yeah, this is not a typical corporate use case, and that's why I'm the wait a minute guy, and you're the this guy, because this is the kind of thinking that is probably going to grow as time goes by. But corporations have to embrace this first before anybody really starts caring about whether there's files or not, because for 10 years there's still going to be files. There's still going to be the things that we think about today. So we are going to this world where our data just exists somewhere, but I think it's a ways out.
Yeah, and this is just a kind of future thought thing also, that files are becoming less important.
Yeah.
So we have 37 seconds left. We've completed our 5 and 15, pretty close to that. In the session description of this sort of thing, we said that we would we could talk about like reminiscing about BriForum and how our first BriForum came to be. And so I was just going to share our 2 BriForum memories, which we can do sort of quickly, I think. The first one was our very first BriForum in Washington, D.C. in 2005. Was anyone here at that BriForum? Thank you. I don't recognize.
It's Andy Wood.
Oh, hey.
Andy.
So thanks for being here still. And the latch malfunction. So
it was my fault. So first BriForum, there was 5 of us that put it on. We had an event planner, Brian and I, Jack, and Brian's family. I guess Jack is Brian's family too. So Brian's family, just the 3 of us, we put this thing on. We went to Costco, bought all of our soda, all of our coffee, rented coffee makers, rented tables, chairs, all of the things that we needed to happen, because this movie theater really was just a movie theater. The only thing that we used that they had were the screens, the projectors, and the popcorn machine. And so we loaded all of these things into a giant lorry, and then this was what, 4 o'clock in the morning, the first day of the show.
Because we rented it, because we filled the truck up over 2 days.
We had to set it. We had to have everything set up at 7 a.m. or 7:30 to let people in. So we have the truck loaded up. We get up at 4. We leave at 4 o'clock in the morning. We drive down the street slightly uphill, and all of a sudden.
See, I don't know this uphill stuff. Like, I'm driving, Gabe's in the cab, and our friend GK. We're driving this rented truck at 4 o'clock in the morning. Streets are empty. Lights are flashing. Like the stop lights are just in flashing mode. So this theater, pitch black, middle of night, and I hear bang, very loud. And I kind of stop truck. I look out the mirror, and I see one of our giant coffee makers rolling down the street. And then I'm like, oh shit, I turn around to look at Gabe and GK. They're gone. Their door's open, and they're gone.
We knew exactly what happened.
And then I look back to that side, and I see the back ends of them like running down the street after this coffee maker.
You know, the latch that you crank down, and it goes underneath, and it's supposed to hold. Well, whoever put that latch down put it on top. So the door just opened up as soon as we hit a bump.
Yeah.
So coffee pot, chairs, tables, you name it.
Dropping down the breadcrumb trail down the streets.
So, yeah.
So that was
the very first day of the very first BriForum
ever. And we get back in.
The truck spilled out over the road.
We're like, oh, I like this idea of doing our own conference. So that's the first year in Washington, D.C. The second year in Washington, D.C., I won't give you the story because we're out of time. But I will just leave this photograph. And these are all BriForum attendees, like just milling about with their badges on. So I'll let you fill in the rest of that story. But this is ask around to BriForum 2006, Washington D.C. So anyway,
was anybody woken up by the fire alarm this morning at the hotel?
Yeah. We think that our event planner pulled that to make sure we would all be there in time for the first session, which she doesn't deny. So all right, hey, thank you so much for coming to our session today.